In our last session, we looked at the beginning of Israel's roller coaster ride through history. We saw God's climb up from a nomad people, united only by a common religion and ethnic heritage, to become a settled and a powerful nation with a charismatic, powerful leader, King David. In this session, we're going to cruise a bit on this highest peak, then click ominously forward, and then plunge downward. Welcome to BSL Session 6, and this session is called From Solomon's Wisdom to Jeremiah's Justice. King David ruled Israel for 40 years. Even before David died, his many sons fought to succeed him. Solomon, with the help of his mother Bathsheba, claimed the throne. Like his father David, Solomon ruled for 40 years, from 961 to 922 BC. We read about Solomon in 1 Kings chapters 1 through 11. Now the Bible holds up David as a model for political and military prowess, and it holds up his son Solomon as a model for wisdom. A key passage is Solomon's prayer in 1 Kings 3, verses 3 to 14. I encourage you to read it. Because Solomon asked only for wisdom and not for riches or power, God granted him wisdom and riches and power. One of the famous stories that tell of his wisdom concerns 2 women and 2 babies. You can read about it in 1 Kings 3, beginning at verse 16. Tradition says Solomon stands behind the book of Proverbs. He probably wrote some of them and had others gathered together. Here's an example of a proverb. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a downcast spirit dries up the bones. When you take a look at this book, you can see that many of these sayings are universal ones. They apply to believers and unbelievers alike. This is wisdom, valid for everyone. And it sort of fits for the times that we're in, because under Solomon, Israel was no longer an isolated backwater podunk country. Nope, during this time, Israel was on the playing field with the big boys, the empires of the time. Solomon benefited from his father David's military exploits. Tributes and taxes from conquered lands poured in, and the country became wealthy. The Queen of Sheba showed up, and she was blown away by Solomon's wisdom and wealth. What to do with all of this wealth? Solomon decided to make good on the dream his father had, build a temple for Yahweh. Now this might seem natural to some of us who have been involved in more than one church building project. But this project represented a dramatic shift in how God was understood. For 1,000 years, the people of God had worshipped a God who traveled with them. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob built altars as they wandered after their sheep during their nomad years. God was always where they were. Then, during the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the people carried with them a tabernacle, a temple in a tent that reminded them of God's mobility. Now Solomon proposed to build an edifice. He knew, and all the people knew, that God is bigger than a temple, that God is also outside the temple. But no one can deny that when you build a grand structure and then bring into it your most sacred article, the Ark of the Covenant, the way you view God and God's presence in your life is bound to change. You start thinking you have God localized. You slowly begin to separate faith from life. Our roller coaster ride now begins to click along toward a downward plunge. Solomon, like David, is often presented by the Bible as a model king, but like his father, he is a flawed leader. In order to consolidate the territories his father conquered, Solomon married princesses from all over his empire. Now, he wasn't doing anything unusual. Every other king of the time did it. And it's ironic. The people had begged to have a king just like all the other nations, and now they had one. Solomon's 700 wives and 300 concubines not only put a strain on the household budget, you can imagine, they also seriously threatened the worship of Yahweh as the one true God. Most of these wives brought their gods with them. To keep peace in his household and to solidify his kingdom, Solomon built temples for their gods as well. 2 Kings 11 verse 6 has this very terse comment. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not completely follow the Lord as his father David had done. Another serious flaw in this wise man's life was his passion for unrestrained building. He not only built the temple, but he built great palaces and elaborate stables. He instituted a system of forced labor in order to build all of these projects. And he had to raise taxes to get them done. Then, when he didn't have enough money to pay off the foreign laborers, he ended up giving them 20 cities in Israel's territory. On top of all this, Solomon established a bureaucracy that soon evolved into a class system. The poor became poorer and the rich became richer. Not such a wise move by a supposedly wise king. And Israel's downward roller coaster plunge picks up speed. At Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam is anointed king of Israel. The nation is economically and socially stretched and stressed. The people are led by an opposition leader named Jeroboam, and they urge the king to adopt a new policy. Here's what they say in 1 Kings 12:4. Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke that he placed on us, and we will serve you. In other words, give us a break. Tragically, Rehoboam rejects their advice and announces that he's going to do his father one better. To show how tough a king he is, he's going to increase their hard service and the heavy yoke of labor and taxes. He may have been tougher than his father, but he was much less wise. We can almost predict the results. The people rebel. Here's what it says in 1 Kings 12. When all Israel saw that the king would not listen to them, the people answered the king, what share do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Look now to your own house, O David. So Israel went away to their tents. The union